Finally, another 5K option for your Mac? Let's talk about it. Welcome back to the channel. So today is a great day if you're a Mac user. We finally have another more budget option for a 5K display from Asus. Now don't get me wrong, this is not a complete budget option or an inexpensive option. It's still $799. You can see it right here on their website, but still, it's still a great option. And that's actually the starting price. It's not even on sale yet. So when this thing goes on sale eventually, it's going to be a really good option to give us that magical 218 dots per inch. That's what we're all looking for. Instead of spending $1,600, we could be spending less than $800. But we still need to ask the question, is the monitor any good, right? $799 is not cheap. So what I'm going to do in the video is I'm going to go through some of the specs. I'm going to kind of show you the design, the build quality, and then show you some pictures of how this thing looks up close. And then finally, I'm going to give you the pros and cons, my pros and cons at the very end of this. So stay tuned to the end of the video. I'm going to give you the pros and cons, and I'm going to tell you if it's worth your hard-earned money, in my opinion. So without further ado, let's get into the Asus 5K monitor. Let's go. All right, so what do we have here? We actually have, it's called the Asus ProArt 5K. The model number is PA27JCV professional monitor. That's what it's called. It's a mouthful, but I'll show you pictures as we're talking about it. Now this is actually going to be a 27-inch. It's an IPS black panel. It's 5K, like I said, 5120 by 2880 screen. That's the magical 218 DPI that we're looking for. What else does it have here? It's got basically, it's what we all wanted, right? We don't want the scaling issues of 4K. When you actually have a 4K monitor, you can run into those scaling issues where text looks maybe a little bit fuzzy. Here we are at the 5K, so it gets rid of all of that, right? You're going to be spending a little bit more, but things should look crisp on the screen, and we're going to figure out if they do. The monitor is 60 Hertz and it has a 5 millisecond response time. Now, 60 Hertz, you may ask yourself, well, why can't it be 120? Even the studio display is 60 Hertz right now, and they really haven't cracked that nut yet. It's basically all 5K screens right now are 60 Hertz for some reason. There's a bandwidth issue and stuff, so you can't really knock this, but it is 60 Hertz. It's more for design than gaming. Just keep that in mind. It's good for creative work, but not so much for gaming, when you're dealing with 60 Hertz. Okay, so the monitor is actually listed right here. It says the monitor is 99% DCI-P3, 95% Adobe RGB, and 100% sRGB. And that's what they stated on the website. And we'll get into that in a second. They gave me like a little document here to kind of prove that to you. So we'll get into that in a second, but I just wanted to kind of state those figures. The contrast ratio says it goes up to 3,000 to 1, but it's basically usually at 1,500 to 1. So it's somewhere between 1,500 to 1 and 3,000 to 1. They did some testing online, and I think they rated it around 1,700 to 1 on some kind of live testing I noticed. So it's still got really good contrast ratio, and it's going to have some deep blacks. All right, also they list this as between 400 and 500 nits of brightness, so actually pretty bright, right? But did anyone do some real testing? They actually did right here. So over here from PC World, you can see in here, here's the Asus up here. They actually rated it at 578, so quite a bit higher than the rating that they had there, almost 600 nits of brightness, and I can attest to it. It's really, really bright. We'll get into that in a second, but I was actually, taken back by how bright it was, considering they said between 400 and 500. So I think in any lighting, any lighting environment and stuff like that, you should be okay with this monitor. Now, Asus also says that this monitor is certified display HDR 500 and HDR 10 compatible. Obviously, with these type of monitors, they don't get really bright enough for really good HDR, so I kind of turn that off. But if you're interested in it, at least it's certified and qualified. Okay, they also give you this little sheet of paper like I talked about. It says it's Calman verified as far as the color accuracy and stuff like that, which is kind of cool here. And then if you look at my sheet here, it says the DCI-P3, the delta E is 0.5, so well under 2. The sRGB average delta is 0.7, so 0.7. That's actually really good on the delta E there. So overall, if you look at this, on paper, it looks really good as far as what they're giving you here. Obviously, they're all going to be slightly different when they give you this because these are individually, calibrated for the exact monitor that you have. So just take that with a grain of salt. Yours may be slightly different than mine, but they're all falling under that 2 number, and they're all really good. A couple other things here. It does say it's flicker-free, and it says that it's ultra blue light technologies, TUV or TUV eye care. That's basically that little symbol you see, TUV with the 2 dots on it. It's gone through that technology for ultra blue light. That's actually really good, and it comes with a 3-year warranty. Now, that's something you don't get from Apple. 3-year warranty on the actual monitor back there. That's a good deal without having to pay extra. Okay, so let's talk about the build quality of the monitor now and what it actually looks like. So when it was shipped to me, it was shipped in a box, and the box is actually really small. I thought it was actually a smaller monitor, like a 24, but they fit it in there, and I'll show you some pictures of that of the box that it shipped in. But overall, you get what you get. It's not like an Apple opening experience as far as the box. They say it's basically, you know, environment-friendly packaging and stuff like that. But don't worry, I'm not into that much. I don't know if you are or not. But overall, it's just a basic box. You unpack it. It's very easy to get into, and there you go. Okay, the monitor itself is made out of dark black plastic. Now I'll show you some close-ups of the front of it. You can see the bezels around it. They're pretty thin. The bottom bezel is a little bit thicker. And the very front of it here, in the very front here, it says Asus in the front. And then, you know, there's a couple other things going on, but the bottom bezel is a little bit thicker than the sides and the top. On the back of it, it's all black plastic as well. It says ProArt on the right-hand side. Sometimes, depending on how the light hits that can kind of shine up a different color, which is kind of interesting. But it's really just a solid black color as far as the actual shell of the monitor. And on the front of it, on the right-hand side, you do get the buttons on the front up here, which is kind of interesting. It's not on the bottom or the back of it. It's actually on the front of the monitor, which makes it easy to get to when you're touching it. But I mean, for people that are like purists as far as, you know, design and stuff like that, they may not like that. But I think it's actually pretty good because you can get to it without having to fuss underneath the thing and trying to figure out what button's what. It shows you right in the front. All right, the monitor stand itself is metal, but it's all wrapped in plastic, so just keep that in mind. It looks good, but it's also silver. I'll show you some close-ups of that. Setting it up has got my 2-minute test here. You just basically screw one screw in. It snaps into the back of the actual monitor panel here, and you're ready to go. So you can get it set up in less than 2 minutes. It's very, very easy. You don't need an engineer's degree to do that, and that's one thing I like. Now the stand actually is really cool because you can do a lot of things with the stand that you can't do with the studio display. You can actually move it up and down. You can see that right there. You can move it side to side. You can move forward and backwards. It kind of goes this way as well. And then you can actually flip it all the way to portrait mode if you want to, which I didn't do there here in the video, but I'll show you maybe if I can find a picture of it. So if you want to do like coding view or something, you can do that as well. So overall, you can do all of that. It's all built in. It also has a VESA mount, 100 millimeter times 100 millimeter on the back of it. So if you want to just get another type of arm for this thing, you can mount it to your desk or something. It's all included without having to pay extra. Just one thing I noticed here, there actually is cable pass-through. I'll show it to you. I'll show you some close-ups, but it's on the stand. It's a little hole there in the stand, but they actually put that a little bit too low. So if the monitor sits low, it's fine because it kind of covers up all your cables. But if the monitor sits up higher, you can see all the cables going through there, and it looks a little bit messy, I guess. I mean, what can you ask for? I just wish they would have made that a little bit higher so it was hidden when you have the monitor a little bit higher. So overall, I think the design is actually pretty good. It's not going to win some design awards and stuff like Apple's products sometimes, but I think it's good enough. The only thing I didn't like so much about the stand in general is it can get a little bit flimsy, only because, I don't know if flimsy is the right word, but it doesn't just stop at 90 degree and 180 degree. It can go anywhere in between. So if you're kind of fussing with it or you bump it, it could get a little bit off of alignment like this. So it's kind of not exactly 90 degrees, and then you got to kind of sit there and kind of make it go back to normal. I mean, that's kind of a first world problem, but just something I wanted to tell you about. Okay, let's talk about ports and what comes in the box as well. So what they give you in the box is they give you a USB-C cable. It's sitting right here. They give you actually a HDMI cable, which I have kind of plugged over here into my Mac Mini, and then it's going into the monitor. So I'm using the HDMI. And we'll get into that. But they give you those two cords in the box. They also give you a cleaning cloth here, which is in this plastic wrap here. But that's actually a nice, kind of a nice upgrade there. They don't have to do that, but they give it to you. This is a matte screen, which we'll get into in a second. So overall, it does have, as far as the cleaning cloth, you have to be a little bit careful with it. But I still like the touch there of giving it to you and not having to buy your own. So on the back of the monitor on the lower left, there's a place where you can plug in the actual plug into the monitor. Now the actual power supply is internal in the monitor, so you don't have a power brick or anything like that hanging out of it, which is really nice because it's just one cord into the power instead of having a power brick. Also right next to the power, there's actually an on and off button, which you always leave on because there's another switch on the front. And there's a Kinnings lock there as well in case you want to lock it up, but that's all on the left side. Okay, for the ports, it gives you a whole bunch of ports, and this is what I like about this. Now, there's some pros and cons to these ports, which we'll get into, but let me just go ahead and list them here. Comes with an HDMI 2.0 port, and I'll show you some pictures of that. Display port 1.4, then a USB-C port, and it actually has with display port alternative mode built into it. So you can use it a couple different ways, but it is USB-C, and it says it's up to 96 watt power delivery on that port as well. Then there's another USB-C right next to it, and that's going to be for just basically data. So there's really just 3 video inputs. I believe it's HDMI, display port, and then the USB-C with that display port technology built into it. So you get those 3, plus you get the additional USB-C here. You get a headphone jack, and then you get 2 USB-A's just for like, typing, putting in accessories and stuff like that. Now, actually beyond that, on the very bottom, this has got like a built-in hub, and there's like a little area at the very bottom of the monitor that has a couple other plugs. It has a USB-A, I believe, let me just see here. Yes, a USB-A, and then has another USB-C there. Now those are actually for plugging in things like keyboards or other accessories as well. You can even plug in like external hard drives in there and stuff like that. But keep in mind that that's only up to 5 gigabits per second, so it's maybe not the best solution for that. But plugging in a whole bunch of different things is really good here because it's got all these different ports. And I'll have a link to all this stuff in the video description to give you, in case you missed some of this stuff, it'll have all this in there. So just definitely check that out if you're thinking about this product. There is no webcam on this, as you can see back here, so you're not going to get a webcam. You have to buy that separately. There are speakers on this thing, but I do not want you to use them, so they're okay. In a pinch, if you have nothing else, use them, but you're not going to want to use these long-term, just like almost any other monitor except for maybe the studio display. So just keep that in mind that they're speakers, but you just don't want to use those. A couple other things that the monitor has that people want to know about. It does have built-in picture-in-picture, so you can go ahead and use that. It's also got the hub like I mentioned before, so you can plug in different, keyboard or a mouse, and you can switch between different computers. And it'll switch for you basically. So if you have multiple systems connected to the same monitor, it'll switch your keyboard or your mouse between each one with that hub. So that's actually a really nice feature. Okay, now the screen itself is something called Lux Pixel Technology, and it's really a matte screen, but it does a really good job at blocking light. I mean, I have a whole bunch of lights in front of me. I don't know if you can see them over here. It's hard to kind of pick them up. Now, if you really pixel peep on this thing, you're going to see, when you look at it from different angles and stuff, you might notice that screen. It's kind of a matte screen, maybe taking just a teeny bit away from the sharpness. So if you're used to like a full glass display like the studio display, it takes a little bit of getting used to, but if you're coming from more of a matte screen anywhere else, I think it's very, very similar to that. It's just maybe they have a little bit, they call it a different technology built into it for anti-glare, and it does work really well. So for all it's worth, I mean, if you needed that on a studio display, you're going to be paying a lot more for that. Here it's included. Okay, let's talk about the screen now. So like we had mentioned, it's 5K IPS black. It's a really good screen here. Text is going to be ultra sharp. It's hard for me to show you through my video camera and stuff, so I'm not even going to really try that much. But just trust me, the text, you don't have any scaling issues whatsoever. There's no fuzziness. It does look really good. Again, is it as good as a studio display? Probably not ultra, just because it is the matte finish versus that glass, if you get the glass with the studio display. But I think if you were comparing matte to matte, it's going to be very, very close. So the text is very, very sharp. And if that's something that you're really interested in, like you're a coder or something, this could be a good option. And then 5K does give you 77% more working surface, obviously, and the text doesn't get too small. So that's versus 4K. So from 4K to 5K is a 77% increase in your kind of workspace, which is huge here. That's another reason you spend up for these monitors. Okay, let me just show you some pictures though. I mean, kind of the star of the show is just how bright the colors are, how everything pops in the screen. It's just overall a really good panel. So I just want to show you some examples as I'm talking. I've showed you some before, but you can see I think it's a beautiful screen overall compared to like a lot of other ones out there, right? Again, we have to compare it to the studio display, but we really can't because that's over double the cost when you add on these other features like the stand and everything. So it's really in a class by itself for 5K right now. I do think it's really good. I think it's actually a little bit better than the Samsung. It's hard to say, but I do think it's a good option for a lot of people. But just look at these colors, they really pop. Now, when we talk about brightness, again, I wanted just to bring that up one last time. It did score up, above that 500, almost 600 in that range. And I noticed right out of the box, I mean, I use it at like 50% at most, 55% on my normal kind of work environment. In my normal room, I have a couple lights on. So I can't imagine. I mean, it got so bright, I was actually kind of surprised, really, to tell you the truth, how bright it can get compared to some of the 4K monitors I've dealt with. So overall, I don't think it should be a problem for most unless you're like working out in like a glass room or something where you need like super, super high, brightness and stuff like that. I don't think this is going to be a problem for you. So I just want to let you know brightness is good. I mean, even when I was filming this thing, I'm showing you pictures, I had it at like 10 or 12 or like 15%, I think, because it's hard to film, obviously, unless it's pretty low. But still, I did like 15% to show you here, but it goes all the way up to 100. So it's really, really bright. Okay, so now the blacks on the screen, as far as getting really black with the contrast ratio being above 1500 to 1, they're actually pretty good, surprisingly good. You have to dial in the settings to your liking. It took me a little while to get it perfect there. Now, I'm just going to show you as I'm talking. These are some examples here. Now, again, is it perfect? Is 100% as good as a studio display? Maybe not. But is it worth the $799 for sure? Is it better than a lot of 4Ks? For sure. So I think overall right there, the price point is actually very accurate where it should be. And I think it's a good, good quality overall. Now there's one setting in there that, obviously, before I say that, if you have like a big bright object on a black screen, you are going to get some kind of blooming effect and stuff like that. But they actually had dynamic, what is it called? Dynamic dimming was turned on the screen. I'll show you like a little picture of where that is. But I actually turned that off and it really did help to fix that. So there wasn't as much blooming. Now there's a little bit, it's hard to kind of get rid of everything. The screen is pretty uniform again, but it's It's not like, a $2,000 monitor here. We're talking under $800. So I think, again, for the cost, it's going to do a good job here. Is it perfect? No. Good job? Yes. And like I said, just look at some of the images here. It's just hard to show you because I'm going through cameras and stuff. You're going to have to get one and just test it yourself to your liking, but I think it just looks great. So next, let's talk about all the pros and cons, but we're going to start with the cons first, all right? So one con could actually be the design. Obviously, it's a full plastic design. You can see over here, it's this black finish. And it's a pro and a con at the same time if you like that kind of thing, but it's not going to win any, like I said, design awards. It's not going to be comparing to like the Studio Display. If you're somebody that wants, your aesthetically, it has to be super important on your desk to match your Mac, or whether it's like a Mac Mini over here or your MacBook and it has to be silver and all this stuff in metal, this is not the one for you, right? I mean, obviously, they had to save costs somewhere, and that's where they're really saving a lot of the costs is more the build quality. It's not bad by any stretch, but it is not like a $1,600 build quality versus, being less than that. So it's going to be more like the 4K monitors. Just keep that in mind. Con number 2 is actually 60 hertz, I guess, at 5K. But keep in mind that almost all, I think all 5K monitors right now are, so you can't really count that as a negative, but just something to note. Another con is there's no webcam on it, and the speakers are you just don't want to use them. They're in there in case of a pinch, but I'm going to count that as a con because they're just not that good. Another con is the cable pass-through is a little bit low on there, so if you actually have the monitor up, it kind of looks a little crazy there. The monitor's stand is a little bit flimsy because it doesn't lock in at 90 and 180 degrees there. So overall, like I said, for what it is, it's pretty good, but I just got to throw in there, it's not going to be something if you're expecting the best of the best on the sturdiness of the monitor and stuff like that. It's just not there, but it's really, really good for what it is. Another con, I guess, is that blooming effect that I found, but keep in mind that if you turn off dynamic dimming, it really solves that about 80 or 90% of that issue. There's also a whole bunch of different settings, which I'll get into, which you have to kind of dial it in. That's a pro and a con as well. I'm going to put that on the pro side, so stay tuned for that. But there's a lot of different settings in here where you can kind of get into the weeds and mess it up a little bit, factory reset it and go back to normal and see if you can get it back. It's one of those things where you got to kind of tweak to get to your liking, and then you're going to say, well, do I like it better like this or do I like it better like that? It's not as easy as just like a BenQ MBook mode where you just set it and forget it, but it gives you some options. I guess this could be a con, but overall, you only have the 5 gigabit per second ports for things like SSD drives and stuff, but it does give you the hub, so you can't complain there as well. That's a good option. It gives you the 3 different options to plug in, but overall, some people might want 2 HDMI ports on there instead of just 1, or 2 fully video in USB-C ports or a Thunderbolt port. It doesn't have that, so just check the ports, make sure it's what you need. I mean, again, that's not really a con, but I just want to say compared to some of the more expensive ones, there it is. And then really the matte finish can be a pro or a con. It's not going to be as sharp as the Studio Display with glass, but then again, either is the Studio Display when it goes matte as well, when it's got the matte finish on it. So you just got to get used to it. This is that Lux panel, they call it. It's basically going to be a little bit, when you get really close, maybe a little bit grainier than it would be on the straight glass. So your eyes have to adjust to it, but it does help with extreme lighting off of the screen, so that's a plus. So just keep that in mind. Okay, now let's get into the pros, right? Number 1 is going to be the price point, right? $799 before any sales. If this thing could go on sale, it could be maybe $699 eventually. And just give Asus some credit right here. Give them credit for meeting the need. We've all asked for this. We all asked someone to go out and build some of these less expensive monitors that are 5K. They're not going to have scaling issues. And Asus threw themselves out there and did it. This is actually good for everybody. It's going to kind of breed some competition. So overall, I think that's a huge positive. Another positive is the 5K, and there's no scaling issue, so text is very crisp and clear on this. So if that's something that bugs you with 4K monitors, this is a pro. The next pro is going to be the brightness, like we had mentioned before. Someone had tested it there at PC Mag or whatever. It was 585, somewhere around there, nits of brightness. So plenty for almost any room environment, unless you have extreme lighting conditions and stuff like that. And on top of that, the blacks get very black, depending on how you have the settings. You have to go ahead and tweak that a little bit, turn off dynamic dimming and stuff like I had mentioned before, but you're going to get some solid blacks on the screen as well. So overall, those are both positives. And then a positive is also the port selection. It does give you, obviously, 3 different ways to connect. You get the HDMI, you get the display port, you get the USB-C, plus it gives you a whole bunch of other options to plug in different things like keyboards and mice and SSD drives, even though they're a little bit slower there. So I think that's a good option overall. Again, could you have more? Yes. But at the end of the day, when you're paying this money, I think it goes right to that price point, and it's more than you need here for most people. I mean, I know people will post in the comments they'd rather have this or that, but nothing's perfect, right? And this is good enough. Another positive here is going to be they give you a lot of options on changing the color profiles. Some people might think that's a negative because, like I said before, it gets kind of complicated. But I'll show you some pictures here. So a lot of these 4K monitors that are less expensive don't give you all these different options. But if you have very specific settings or you have to kind of match specific color profiles, this gives you a lot of built-in settings here. So the settings overall are pretty strong on the monitor, and you can tweak it a whole bunch of different ways if you want to, if you know what you're doing. I mean, obviously it's calibrated, but you want to go ahead and make sure you're a little bit careful. But if you know what you're doing, it's all to your heart's content in there, and that's a pro. Another pro is, like I just mentioned, it's Calman certified. It gives you this little sheet of paper individually calibrated for each specific monitor, so you know exactly where yours stands right out of the box. The image quality of the pictures in 4K movies and stuff like that is phenomenal. I'll show you one last example there. But overall, I think that's a huge pro just because of again, I mean, you're going to get really good stuff with 4K as well. 5K is just slightly better, but it comes down to those images just pop for me, and the text as well. The text, the kicker. So when you actually are doing something and watching a video at the same time, they both work really well. Okay, so at the end of the day, is this a studio display beater? Does it beat the studio display? Not really, right? And it doesn't need to. That's the main thing here. So I would just say if you're someone that needs the studio display because you want it to look a specific way, or if you want that glossy screen, you definitely need to get the studio display. But if you're somebody that wants to save, almost or more than half the money, because if you add the matte finish to the other one, if you need that, or the adjustable stand, you're talking a lot more than $1,600. So this is going to be less than half of that. And this is where this really shines at with Asus. I think as long as you understand what you're getting, that's the important thing here. I mean, again, we all asked Asus and we all asked these companies to come out with another monitor for us to give us some options here with 5K, and they're finally starting to do it. And the reason this is so good, and you have to thank Asus for this, and even give them a shot with this monitor, is because by doing this, this creates other companies to do the same thing. I know there's a BenQ one coming out, 5K, I think earlier this year coming up, like in January, February. So they're all starting to have to jump into this kind of realm here because now these little companies, the big companies, all companies are starting to create these 5K monitors. And Asus is no different. They actually have a pretty solid entry here. Again, is it as good as a studio display? No. But just understand what you're getting here because it doesn't need to be, right? It needs to be half as good, but I think it's more like 80% as good. And that's where it's kind of a win here overall. I mean, the bottom line we're all trying to solve is that, 218 pixels per inch, right? That's what Apple wants us to have for the Retina display, and so text is crisp and clear on their systems. With all the scaling, how it scales up and all that stuff, the 218 is the magical number, and that's what we have here. So at the end of the day, this is actually a win for people that don't even need one of these things, right? Because we're all going to get more competition, which is going to give us more monitor options in the future and hopefully drive the costs down. That's what's happening right before us. So give Asus a chance here. Overall, I'll have links to all the stuff in the description so you can see all the individual specs and everything, because obviously there's a lot of questions you probably have about this. I'm just giving you my opinion on the price point. You could look at it and feel totally different, but it's important to understand that the scaling issue is the big thing when you're getting into this price range. If you need something way better, obviously there's other options. But if you just want to get past that scaling issue with 4K on the Mac Mini, the M4s that just came out, this might be the one for you. Give it a try. They got good return policies. I'll have links to everything in the description, and we will talk to you in the next one. Peace.